Okay, so this one is about the distribution of wealth in the new digital economy. And this is a topic related to the project I talk about on this podcast a lot called Powerhouse, which is one component of a trinity of components working together as one, called a self-regulating perpetual organisation, or a SERPO, where you have a distributed autonomous organisation, a DAO. I actually call it a digital autonomous organisation now because, DAOs are capable of distributed and consolidated authority now, and that's how it needs to be, in my opinion. We have a DAO bonded to a charitable trust. It employs the charitable trust as an agent on behalf for the purpose of appreciating or activating, appreciating and preserving the assets of the community. And then the charitable trust is empowered to employ agencies on its behalf to appreciate those assets. And so Powerhouse is that company. And so it's a digital asset marketplace that is a centralized marketplace for all the fragmented assets. And the charitable trust acts as the treasury as well as the judiciary on behalf of the community. But it's constitutionally bound to, I'm not going to go into this in huge detail. If you want more information on this, listen to my podcast episode called My Vision for a World That Works for Everyone. I go into it in detail, but I need to go over this briefly to provide some context for this podcast episode. And so because the charitable trust is the treasury, so it deploys capital on behalf of the community, releases capital, and as well as it reconstitutes assets. Let's say someone gets hit by a bus, a custodian of an asset goes to the charitable trust. The charitable trust is then constitutionally bound to preserve that asset, potentially reconstitute it so that it continues appreciating. Or if it becomes rendered obsolete, then to annihilate that asset. I'm not going to go into detail into that yet, but so that it's not sitting there on the marketplace or, in a morass of latent potential that will never be activated, because we want to always be able to measure the latent potential of the market in any given time. So this is kind of setting the backdrop to the distribution of wealth. So in this scenario, you have Powerhouse. It's a global marketplace. The first product releases for the MVP for Powerhouse is the ability for anyone utilizing WordPress and WooCommerce in particular. We know there's over 1 million assets, well over 1 million assets already in this state, in this format. It is the ability for them to, through an API, transition those products and services they've got listed, and translate them into off-chain NFTs on the marketplace. And so Powerhouse represents a window into the latent potential of, the forming of the marketplace, of the centralized marketplace. And what happens is when an asset is minted, when an NFT is constituted, you create a constitution. That constitution remains with the DAO. So you're submitting the constitution to the DAO so that the constitution is viewed as the common law asset in the form of, you'd call it a title. So within that contract, it has rights and privileges and entitlements and all that kind of stuff. And then the authority to appreciate that asset, being the constitution, is given to the charitable trust, and then the charitable trust appoints an agency on its behalf to appreciate those assets. And so the NFT really is on the Powerhouse Marketplace as a container for the true asset, which is the title or the contract itself. So those of you that are really into this stuff will see that that's a completely immutable, invincible, perpetual framework for the protection of assets and perpetuity of intangible assets. Because those intangible assets can protect physical assets through entitlement. You know, the right to possess, and also it can contain obligations. You know, so to pay the zero bill or to pay the server bill or whatever it may be. As well as liabilities. So the topic of this podcast, the distribution of wealth, how does this work? So let's say it's well down the track. You know, Powerhouse is it's migrated. You know, the majority of the world's WordPress / WooCommerce users onto the NFT marketplace. You know, there are a bunch of agencies who have been empowered on behalf by the trust to incubate collaborative ventures. We call them SERPOs, utilizing the dormant assets on the marketplace, activating them, bringing them on chain, on the blockchain, to form and bonding them together. And so what happens is they're constitutionally bound. So in this process, what happens is, let's say there's an agency. So one of my companies is called Morpheus. It's the pilot agency for incubating SERPOs, self-regulating perpetual organizations. So it goes onto the marketplace and it sees, oh, you know, here's a dozen assets, and those assets are the expertise and skills of human beings. And it says, okay, there's a really cool, actually I'm not going to digress into that. I'll do another podcast episode for that. No, I will touch on it briefly. It's called a SERPO generator. So what you do is it's AI based, using a prototype application. Our legendary developer has come up with. It's called Decisions. And see, basically, long story short, you answer a whole bunch of questions about your venture that you're getting into, and you click submit, and then it goes through all of the assets on the marketplace and suggests and presents you with all the faces of custodians of assets who could form that organization. Here's a business development person, here's an accountant, here's a bookkeeper, you know, here's a technical lead, here's a project manager, a CEO. And then you click invite, and that invitation is a pledge. So it's a pledge to appreciate your assets with royalties from my venture, and then the process of reconciling the bonding of the assets with each other begins from there. So that reconciliation, it reconciles the incompatibility between the assets. So, for example, the venture may need a certain person for 10 hours a week, and this person's only got 8 hours of dormant potential to invest. And so the reconciling of the contract, you reconcile it until there is harmony or compatibility, and the contract changes until there's a bond formed. And once the assets are bonded, then you have, it's like a molecule forming, you know, atoms seeking stable bonds, then the molecule forms, and you have an asset bonded to another asset, and then the human beings involved are simply the custodians of those assets who are agents on behalf of those assets that contain entitlements, privileges, obligations, etc. And so you can literally get the AI to trawl the marketplace for you to create an autonomous organization based on a whole bunch of questions you've answered. And using, soul machines, for example, you can have someone who's disabled or, severely disabled, just talking into the computer or into their smartphone, answering all of these questions and, saying that I need someone to be able to read my emails and send emails on my behalf or whatever it may be. And they can be recommended people who are, who specialize in those kinds of things, have those kinds of expertise. So, and this is the beauty of having a centralized asset marketplace. So you can empower as many agents as you want to incubate autonomous organizations that are invincible and have immutable DNA because of the DAO protecting the common law constitution, and you have perpetually and infinitely mutable form because each asset is in its base form. And so they're like atoms, they're like building blocks. You just bond them together to form any kind of organization that you want to. But here's the beautiful thing, is that organization, it doesn't exist. It's just an avatar. The actual venture itself exists in the imagination of the people who are collaborating on the project in the form of a brand or a logo and a mission statement, because it's all going to be contained within a constitution that is held within the community itself of the DAO. And you can't destroy something that is invisible. And this is of massive benefit, especially to people around me who've actually discovered really groundbreaking technologies and disruptive technologies, who will never allow them to see the light of day because of the fact that anything that is incorporated and bound by the law of statute can be broken up by the government against, the originally intended purpose of that trust. And, I think the Wellcome Trust is a classic example of, it was the holy grail of trusts being impervious and just continuing to evolve and thrive. And even that got broken up by the courts. Eventually, so that certain assets could be sold off. Now, that was probably the will of the community, so I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but nonetheless, that it can still happen. It can still be infiltrated in that way. So, the distribution of wealth in this mechanism. So it's fully mature. Hopefully that's given you a snapshot of what it may look like when it's, pretty mature and operating in a, there are people who are converting their LinkedIn profiles into dormant assets. There are people who are converting their YouTube videos into dormant assets. Spotify, Beatport, iTunes, they'll come up with ways to make that difficult, obviously, but nonetheless, there'll be an exodus of at some point. And a royalty distribution mechanism in the background. That's the main superpower of the Powerhouse platform, is the distribution of royalties to everyone that's collaborating on a project. So that obviously can apply to streaming, as well as, the purchase of goods and services, or the purchase of NFTs. And so the elephant in the room is the fragmentation of all of these cryptocurrencies, NFTs, on other marketplaces, on other exchanges. And how do you create a mechanism for those to be translated? And it's actually pretty simple. It's pretty simple, because if someone has an asset elsewhere, they can bring that into the Powerhouse Marketplace and just imbue the authority to that NFT or to that asset into a new constitution. So you reconstitute that NFT. That then goes. You're then submitting it to the DAO for protection in perpetuity. The common law trust is then bound constitutionally to activate and appreciate that asset. But it's in a format that's uniform on the Powerhouse Marketplace, and it can be engaged with as such. But ultimately that NFT is under the custodianship of the trust, but that doesn't stop you from being proactive with it. You're the ultimate decision maker. You've got the right of revocation. You've got the right of, you can do whatever you want. But in the background, you've always got the silent force of the constitution of that trust proactively seeking to appreciate your assets. And, your asset could be popping up. If someone's using the Serpo generator, your asset could pop up and someone could contact you saying, hey, I'd love to utilize this asset for this venture that I'm working on, or whatever it may be. Or I'd like to purchase this, or whatever it may be. So the distribution of wealth. And this is I can't tell you how frustrating it was to try and explain this to my team, who are all deeply entrenched in the way things are now, and the way that the government is now, and the way that economics is done now, and the way that finance works, and the way things are done right now. And so, I talk about royalty distribution and all these things, and they're like, oh, we can't do that. And it's been like, it feels like, teaching your great grandmother how to reprogram the remote control sometimes. And that's just the way it is. And, my intention with this whole project is to bring everyone along with us. So if they don't understand, that's not something I'm willing to ignore. It's something that I'm going to, everyone has to come into this new digital economy that is emerging, whether anyone likes it or not, and is going to disrupt, and like a tsunami hitting. When you look at the penetration levels of how many DAOs there are right now versus how many are going to be coming through in the future, it's just enormous. And all of these digital assets that are containing containers of value that can't be measured, and, just perpetual fragmentation. And so, how does it work, the distribution of wealth? So it's actually really simple, but it relies on this, the Trinity structure of a Serpo to work. Because what you do is, let's say you're, here, I'll give you a scenario. Let's say you enter a venture with someone and the core business is selling t-shirts. And so someone's jumped onto the Powerhouse Marketplace, and they want to create a t-shirt business. And so they've formed a team, a Serpo, the ideal team, and they've said to the business development person, they've agreed on 10% commission from every sale. They've said to the graphic designer 5%. They've said to the warehouse person 8%, and whatever it may be, and everyone's got their agreed percentage commission from every sale of a t-shirt to collaborate on the project together. So when a t-shirt is sold, what happens is the royalty, the commission, goes to the trust. And the custodian of we call it the principal asset pertaining to a SERPO. I won't go into that in depth yet, but they make an obligation-free donation to the trust. So this is how, the elephant in the room with my team, and you explaining this was a nightmare. They still don't understand it. Is storing people's money, becoming a financial institution. Now, as a charitable trust, you are legally allowed to receive donations and ask for donations. And so when someone buys a T-shirt, let's say the T-shirt's $50, that $50 is donated to the trust, and then a token is issued. Or, we'll call it an NFT for now, because the tokenization of things the technology is not quite there for us yet. Called a power coin. And so that power coin goes into your wallet, and all you do is when you want to, you've got a digital wallet in your dashboard showing how many power coin you've got, how much power coin you've got, and when the time comes, you can exchange your power coin for real currency that the charitable trust is, that it's got. And it basically buys your power coin. And it's the only entity in existence that has the power to purchase your power coin. You can't trade or exchange it on another marketplace. You can only make it available for sale, for purchase by the treasury of the charitable trust. And that charitable trust pays you whatever the exchange rate is for the currency that you're requesting, or whatever, because this is a New Zealand venture, we're benchmarking power coin against the New Zealand dollar. So it's tempting to do the US dollar, but I won't go into the reasons why. We're benchmarking against the New Zealand dollar. So the charitable trust purchases the power coin, and and that's it. And that's it. So now the thing with the charitable trust, it receives a tithe, and that's how it operates, and that's how the wealth generated by the Powerhouse platform contributes to the community DAO that appoints it. So it's 10% of every transaction, and as that accumulates, so this, in terms of distribution of wealth, as that accumulates, Powerhouse, the charitable trust, they simply they create new NFTs and distribute them like a universal basic income. And this is the way that you ensure that, that wealth is being utilized in the marketplace to meet a currently unmet need. That's basically how it works. And, I won't go into the intricacies right now because there's quite a few of them, but the beautiful thing about an NFT is it can have a shelf life. So let's say if you've got people stockpiling PowerCoin because they're making predictions based on what the New Zealand dollar is going to do because it's benchmarked against the New Zealand dollar, then it's like a piece of fruit. When you pick a piece of fruit, it's already on the process of depreciating back into the earth and being reconstituted into and refused into some other form of life. And it's the same ethos with the currency, and it's a mechanism for exchange. But once the coin's minted, it should be slightly depreciating. There should never be an incentive for the means of exchange to be commoditized. And this is, and this will, if you guys are into cryptocurrency, that might send shivers up your spine for me to say that. But and I think deep down you probably know this, that we have to be able to remove those bubbles. If we've got a mechanism for exchange in the economy, it has to remain non-commoditized. The mechanism for exchange, the moment it is commoditized, you begin utilizing the vehicle that's meant to facilitate the exchange of value. You've got that mechanism not being utilized for its originally intended purpose. And so so you mint an NFT, it's got a shelf life, and then we know that if you've got a 12-month shelf life on that NFT, the Power Coin we've minted, then you're going to be proactively looking to invest that into a productive venture because you want it to appreciate. And, understand, there are other vehicles as well where if the trust is minting a new asset and ultimately they are the custodians of that asset and that asset has to be appreciated, then, they can revoke it. If you're not going to appreciate this somehow, then we'll redeploy it where it will appreciate. And the most likely place it will appreciate is with, an agency that's entrepreneurial in nature. So, and this is how you administer a universal basic income. The reason that this works is because we've got a dormant asset marketplace off-chain, so we can measure the dormant potential of the market with a tangible figure. You've got a marketplace showing the on-chain assets. So those are all of the assets that have been activated and are currently appreciating, meeting an unmet need. And so they're receiving royalties from sales of productive ventures. And so we can measure that. We can take a snapshot of all of the assets that are in the process of depreciating, how many are in the process of appreciating, how many are in the state of limbo, or limbo being someone's been hit by a bus, had to go back to the trust to be redeployed, or reconstituted, or whatever it may be. So it could still be appreciating, but it's currently in limbo. And then you've got stagnation, and that is an asset that is doing the same amount every week, and that you consider that vulnerable, because if something's stagnant, it means that, and it's not growing, it's more than likely it's entirely dependent. And anything within an ecosystem that is entirely dependent on one thing, like the panda bear is entirely dependent on one species of bamboo to survive, then it's at risk and it's vulnerable. And so if you can flag something as stagnant, then you can proactively retain and incrementally grow something. And so stagnancy is always a flag for innovation. And so everyone on the Powerhouse Marketplace, they can look at all of their assets within their dashboard and see what's happening with them. They can see the dormant potential, so how many of their off-chain assets, their expertise, their skills, and their resources, what the potential value of them is. Then they've got their appreciating assets, depreciating, dormant, and limbo. And how cool is that? You can manage your own expertise and skills, like a portfolio of assets. And instead of actually, starting your own business and being an accountant, for example, you are actually, in a very entrepreneurial way, you are part of potentially dozens of organizations that need your skills. And so they're like customers, but the truth is that you are a collaborator in a venture where with shared risk and reward that is based on distributed authority. So you're an agent on behalf of those organizations. You're not picking up the phone and telling them that they should be doing this. You're doing it. You're taking responsibility. You're backing yourself to enable that organization to be successful. And in this day and age where, myself, I've experienced it firsthand, having to engage third parties, they're trying to avert and avoid responsibility at any cost. They want you to pay them money regardless of whether there's utility in what they're providing for you, and they will take on your business even if they know that they potentially aren't going to add value. And that's not in the spirit of self-responsibility and distributed authority. In this mechanism of distributed authority and autonomous organizations, SERPOs, you back yourself. You say, I believe that I can, this is an organization I believe in. This is something I would enjoy and that would be fun. And I'm willing to put my own time and energy online as an investment in this organization because I believe in it. And I'm going to give my all to that organization. Together, we'll all invest ourselves into this organization and share the risk and the reward together through a share of royalties. You can just and all you need to focus on is doing what you love, sharing your passion with people who are genuinely in need of your expertise and skills. You don't have to be the best at everything. You just have to be doing something that you enjoy and that's appreciated by someone else. You can just get up in the morning and just execute and do what you do best and not even focus on what you're getting paid for anything. Just look at your portfolio of assets. Just look at your dashboard and go, wow, this one's doing super well. It may not even be the organization you've invested most of your time and energy into, but what this enables you to do is to spread your skills across a portfolio of ventures like an asset manager would. And, it's the classic scenario with a venture capitalist or a fund. Portfolio companies, they're not all unicorns. And someone who invests in early stage startups or seed stage, they back a whole lot of them that fail. But the only reason that they are successful is because, one or two of them are unicorns. And so it enables them to continually keep taking that risk with someone that they think, gee, this could really be something. Of course, it needs to be managed risk and all the rest of it. But it enables you to do that with your expertise and skills. It enables you to contribute to a project whose barrier to progress is access to adequate funding. But you're inspired by it, and so you invest in it, and it could take off with no money potentially. Not all people who come up with incredible ideas and concepts and creative people, they don't have the skill set to turn it into a pitch or into some kind of format that's going to be appropriate for an investor. But when you've got your skills spread, when the risk of your skills are spread across a portfolio of ventures, some of them may fail, some of them will be unicorns. The success of a particular venture and the rewards you're receiving from that venture probably won't even correspond to the amount of time and energy you're putting in. It means you've got spare time and energy to put into something that's, got a tiny chance of being successful, but for some reason, your curiosity is compelling you, your passion is compelling you. There's something about it that you want to pursue, and because of the nature of how you work, it's collaborative. You're not dependent on a single source of income, or just you haven't got all your eggs in one basket. You can deploy yourself knowing that you've got a baseline. Not having to force someone to give you money before you share your gifts, the gifts that you've been privileged to be born with. And really, it's incredible that humanity hasn't figured this out much sooner, that this is how it has to be, that life is not about the economy and the money moving around it. It's about the appreciation of the assets, and the assets of the people. And we're not successful as an economy until all of those assets are appreciating. And if you believe that certain human beings don't have any value, you're seriously misguided. You're seriously misguided, because everything in existence, every form of life that exists because of evolution. It arises to meet the unmet need of some other form of life. It's the only way that adaptation works. It's the only way that innovation works. It's the only way a new species comes into being. And your uniqueness is there waiting to be unlocked and appreciated. And, the beautiful thing about a DAO is that it's community-led. It means that the community is self-responsible. If something's not working, they don't blame the government. They can identify the government, being the charitable trust in this case. They can identify the government or a trustee on the board or one of their advisors. They can identify them as the cause of an outcome that is not wanted. But then they have to take responsibility of what to do about it. Go to the community, lobby the community. How can we? Do we provide additional support for this trustee? Do we go to market and find some other advisors? And it gets rid of this nonsense culture of, a human being on LinkedIn, doing a post on LinkedIn about the current government or the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister screwing up our country, what's the world coming to? And it's like, well, the solution is to take the power back. The solution is to delegate authority to people who are going to act on your behalf. Give them agency, but understand that you're ultimately responsible. So what's the solution? And, this mechanism of a Serpo is brilliant because it separates out the will of the people from the administration of the actualization of that will. And then you've got the company that's just executing. And so you can actually have digital direct democracy, where it's like where you have referendum or binding referenda, people voting on, let's not do Brexit. And the people aren't equipped to determine whether Brexit is right or not for the community. But what they are empowered to do is to share what they want, so that they have a unified intent of purpose. That way, when the community goes to, delegates to the charitable trust, this is our intent. Then they're the ones that determine the ideal way to actualize that intent, utilizing, their advisors and their agencies, but always focused on the appreciation of the assets. And so if we ever looking for a new venture, if we're ever looking to initiate a new venture or an idea, it always begins with the constitution of of an expression of intent, sharing the vision and the will of that venture. And it always begins there, the principal asset. So, and that remains with the DAO. So hopefully that makes sense. The one last thing I'll talk about is, inflation, deflation. It becomes simple because you've got, you can measure everything. You can measure everything in the marketplace. You can measure the dormant potential. You can measure the actualized potential. So, meaning you can measure the projected GDP of the marketplace. You can measure the money supply because it's all stored in PowerCoin, and then the trust is the custodian of the donations it's receiving from all of the commission from all the sales that are happening on the marketplace. And you can always reconcile those two things together. What is the value of the fiat currency that we are currently holding? There's too much of it, needs to be deployed. And so, issue some time-based tokens. Or, there's not enough of it. It's too scarce. And so when you have, you're never going to let that happen because you're always balancing the PowerCoin versus the actual reserves. And so that's how you manage it. You're never trying to make money more or less scarce. You're always trying to unlock more potential to meet a currently unmet need. And so in that scenario, because the entire marketplace is built on the foundation of productive venturing, then you know that when when a need arises, when you see an unmet need and a collaborative venture forms around it, then it helps mitigate the risk of investment or backing ventures. And ultimately that's what surplus wealth is utilized doing, is backing ventures within that marketplace that have the potential to be productive and therefore generate royalties for everyone and commissions and a tithe for the charitable trust, and the cycle continues. So but ultimately it's down to the community. What do they want to do with the surplus wealth? They can set up foundations, do charitable things, invest in infrastructure. They can do anything with that surplus wealth. But, my vision for the future is for the decision-making algorithms of that charitable trust to be imbued into artificial intelligence at some point, so that when there is, a surplus or a deficit of particular things, then it triggers the establishment of a new, and it does this autonomously, of new funds that can then be accessed by, child DAOs within the community that are for a specific purpose, for the preservation of XYZ or, and that's a key thing of this. That's a key aspect of this as well, is that preservation has to come from a surplus. Growth has to come from a surplus. And, so we're never sacrificing everything that we need to maintain a baseline level of survival or just above that we're only ever making advancements from a surplus, so that we can afford to lose everything that we put into the progress that we want to make. So, that's how it works. if you've got any questions, flick me an email, and I'll do my best to get back to you. Okay, that's it for now for the nature of wealth distribution in the emerging digital economy. Cheers for now.